What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. I actually tried to get on the lake the last couple of weeks to do a live stream on the lake. A few of you may have seen that. And right now it's thundering and lightning outside. Last week we went to a lake that was supposed to have good cell reception and didn't. So, anyways, we're doing a live stream now from the house. And I just basically want to talk to you guys today about what I've been up to in my fishing the last few weeks. As you may have seen in one of my recent YouTube videos, I'm starting to fish a lot more. I took a pretty big break to focus a lot of my attention on the Deep Dive app and on core tackle, and I'm going to continue working on a few different projects as I fish more, but I do want to really get back into fishing. I feel like I need to maintain my edge in terms of my fishing skills and my knowledge, and oh boy, have I learned a lot over the past few weeks. Things that I kind of almost forgot I knew, other things that I realized I really need to get better at, and I'm going to get into it a little bit in this stream. This is going to be more of like a conversation with a fishing buddy where I'm going to talk you through a lot of the stuff I've been doing, share all the spots and all the things I've been up to. Hopefully this will be a really good listen, even if you're on the drive to the lake or if you're at work or anything like that. I'm also going to try to show some graphics and things like that, but I do want to kind of make this almost like a semi-podcast deal and also kind of a live stream, so maybe you guys will enjoy that. But let's kind of get into it. Before we do that, though, I'm going to transition over here and want to give a huge shout out to the title sponsor of the Fish the Moment live stream and live content. As you guys know, Bridgeford Foods. Bridgeford over here, actually switch back to the solo camera. Bridgeford's been a long-time sponsor of the Fish the Moment live stream and the Fish the Moment long-form content. They make amazing beef jerky and is a great snack take on the lake, high in protein. In the summer months, it'll have a little bit of extra salt in there too, which is always good for retaining, some of that water when you're sweating like crazy, so that's always very helpful as well. So I always have a bag of Bridgeford beef jerky, fits in my glove box, and it is just a great snack take to the lake. The jerky is very tender, and Bridgeford's one of the few non-endemic companies out there that supports bass fishing. So if you want to support a great company that supports the sport we love, then definitely check out Bridgeford Foods at your local dollar stores, gas stations, and Walmarts. You can find it in the checkout aisle. Definitely grab a bag for me. They're a great company and have been a pleasure to work with all these years. Awesome. So let's get into a little bit of what's been going down. So if you guys have any comments or anything, you can always comment over in the live stream. I know I'm streaming a little bit early, but just trying to get these going whenever I am available, and I'm not going to stress too much about the time as I used to. So we just want to get the content out to you guys. Anyway, so if we take a look at a few of the lakes we've been fishing, one of the lakes I've been going to at least a few times is Beaver Lake in Arkansas. So Beaver Lake is a very interesting lake in the sense that there are a lot of quality fish in the lake. They're just very tough to catch. I wouldn't say that there's a ton of like 5 and 6 and 7 pounders, but there's plenty of 3 to 4 pounders in the lake. But for whatever reason, in tournaments, it usually takes like 13 to 15 pounds to get in like the top 5 every single tournament. Maybe a few tournaments in the winter, there'll be a few bigger bags. But overall, like right now, it's taking 15 pounds-ish to do really well in these tournaments. So what I've been trying to do, guys, is figure out how to catch fish on Beaver Lake, just get out there and catch some, but also how to find some of the better quality fish. And there are a lot of learnings I've gathered from this, and it kind of led me to the title of this stream, which is 3 common offshore fishing misconceptions. And I wanted to break those down because there are some misconceptions out there for sure. A couple of them I've known about for a very long time, and I kind of just wasn't really taking into account when I was on the lake, and so I want to reshare them with you because there's things that I kind of almost forgotten. And then there's one new misconception that I want to share with you that I definitely fell victim to, and with the introduction of forward-facing sonar, we've learned so much about bass behavior, and I feel like it's something that I've just started to understand over these past 4 or 5 fishing trips to a much larger extent. I kind of knew about it, but not as much as I do now. So anyways, before we get into that too, I just want to say hi to the guys in the chat. We got Guy B, Fisherman12, and Timo. How are you guys doing? Good to see you guys in the stream. So basically, I want to talk through a few of my trips. So my first trip I took out to Beaver recently, I went to this midsection of the lake. And what I was noticing, it was kind of like mid-May, and I was trying to fish offshore. I was trying to find some first groups of fish that were moving offshore, and honestly, there were a lot of fish out here that were swimming around off some of these longer points of areas where you have creek channels running up against flatter areas. These are very standard, traditional offshore areas. And what I was finding is that there were plenty of fish in these areas, but it was really tough to actually get these fish to bite, for one, and two, it was hard to find quality fish. A lot of the fish that were in these areas that had large concentrations of fish, were anywhere from like 6 to 12-inch fish, very small, and all the baits I was throwing are basically too big to get these fish to eat. And I actually kind of do that on purpose, guys. When I fish offshore, a lot of times I throw a bait that's bigger than like a 12-incher can bite, just because I'm trying to catch those better quality fish. And I was running all of these areas where the channel would swing up really close to these flatter areas, little humps that are out here that you're seeing, channel swing points, longer points that stick out. And there were fish on all this stuff, but they were all really small. So then I was trying to figure out, okay, where could I go to catch some quality fish? And this is kind of where the first misconception about the offshore fishing comes in. A lot of times, the better quality fish are not always going to be setting up in these large groups offshore. A lot of times you can pull up on a spot like this on Beaver and you can find a lot of 12-inch bass. And even if you're on a lake like a Lake Gunnersville or whatever, where there are a pile of fish, maybe the fish in those schools are going to be 3 to 4 pounders. But in a tournament on Gunnersville, you need to catch 25 pounds to have a chance to win. On Beaver, you need to be catching 15 pounds. So it's kind of sad because all my friends who fish Lake Gunnersville, they're catching 3-pounders, and they're like, man, these are tiny fish. And I'm like, I wish I could catch a 3-pounder. And all my schools are 12-inchers. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. It's a Beaver Lake problem. But what I basically found is that as I started moving around the lake, I kept checking these offshore schools, and they were all tiny fish. But as I started coming into these little bays and pockets, I started seeing a ton of better quality fish roaming the banks. They were up here in really shallow water. The lake was a little bit high, and they were chasing either wolf packs of like 3 to 5 bass, or maybe setting up in like brim bed areas and things like that. And so what I realized is that the better quality fish, at least on Beaver Lake in this scenario, were still wolf packing relatively shallow. And what I did is I ended up catching a few quality fish, 2.5 to 3 pounders. And what I figured out, which was interesting, is that I would have to pull into areas that basically had very few fish in the area. So I would pull up, for example, one of the spots I found was like around one of these points that was over here. You can see there's a point that sticks out here and then here. And right as you get to this little transition where it goes from flatter over here and steeper here, there was a little brush pile that was set up here, and there was actually some brim beds that were out here in about like 8 to 12 foot of water. And I would go to those areas, and I would actually see wolf packs of like 3 to 4, maybe 5 largemouth that were setting up, chasing around that area. Now I'd throw a worm over there, and I'd catch a good fish. And it was very interesting because I was finding these groups of 30, 40, 50, 60 fish schools, and I was trying to fish for those. I was trying to throw bigger baits to catch the quality fish, but a lot of those fish were really set up in those smaller, isolated groups. And this is something that I have, again, known for years. I used to do this all the time when I would fish 12, 13, 14 years ago, is I would graph these offshore areas and look for these isolated, small groups of fish, 3 to 5 fish. But one thing that I've noticed now with the forward-facing sonar is that these groups of fish aren't just setting up and sitting on an object. They aren't just sitting on like this brush pile. They'll kind of roll in here, and then they'll roll away, and they'll kind of cruise and get to the next spot. And it's actually very similar to what's happening with the bass that are up shallow on those brim beds, the brim bed bass. And this is something I didn't really realize or think about when I was fishing in the past. I always kind of felt like I would pull up on a spot like a brush pile, and those bass just lived around that brush pile. That's where they were all the time. But with the forward-facing sonar, and also with the underwater camera that I've been throwing the underwater camera down there a few times, and like going to the same spot 3 or 4 times in a day. And what I've found is that you can pull up on a brush pile like this. Like, I'm just picking out an area. This is just a place where a brush pile is. But basically, you pull up in a spot like this, and what would happen is that the largemouth would be in that brush pile for whatever reason for like 2 hours, and they were all in that thing. And then you go back 2-3 hours later, and it's vacant. And maybe catfish have moved in, or you see a few like striper there in the area or whatever, and then you come back later and then crappie are there, and it's blowing my mind. But it makes a lot of sense, because when you really think about bass behavior when you're fishing up shallow, a lot of guys know about these wolf packs of bass that just cruise the shallow waters. And I think that a lot of times we're getting this misconception that a brush pile or a piece of cover or whatever is just always going to hold better quality fish, and they're just going to live there, they're going to be sitting there. And I just don't think that's really the case. I think that these fish are moving in and out of these areas. And I'm not saying that you can't pull up and catch fish out of the same brush pile day after day after day. But what I am saying is that there may be times when the brush pile is going to fire and those fish pull in. And maybe it's consistent, maybe it's not consistent. But in general, it seems like what I'm realizing more with the forward-facing sonar is that there may just be a general area where there are better quality fish. Like this whole pocket or this area out in front, there are just quality fish around the area, not necessarily in this one brush pile all the time. And so that's, again, kind of a massive misconception. I'm kind of getting, it's something I knew about, but it's not something that I fully, I guess, comprehended without the forward-facing sonar. And that's that instead of looking for those giant schools of fish like on, edge of a point or a ledge or whatever, there are a lot of fish to be caught in smaller 3 to 4 to 5 fish groups that roam a larger area. And if you can identify that bigger area, now you're going to be onto something. And this is a very big shift in my mentality when I've been going to the lake, because I haven't dialed this in at all. I don't know what I'm doing with this enough to really like give you guys any concrete advice on how to find one of those areas. I do have 2 potential thoughts on it though, and it kind of comes down to an area that I was fishing further down the lake later that week. And what I was trying to figure out, and I never really did figure out, is at least my theory. And again, I'm not gonna say I know everything on this, because I am just getting back into the groove, getting back in the grind of fishing. But the same thing was happening on the lower end of the lake. I was actually posted a video this past Friday. If you haven't seen it, it's a catch 15. It's really good. It's one of the best videos I've put out in a very long time. So go check out that video if you haven't seen it already. It's my video I posted last Friday on Beaver Lake. And what I did in that video is I basically was graphing a lot of main lake ledges and things like that. And I was finding a ton of fish. I probably caught like 25 fish offshore that day, maybe 10 keeper largemouth off of like this ledge in particular where it drops off very sharp. The issue though is that all of those fish were 2-pounders, 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 and all day I was catching 2-pound bass. And I even went way up the War Eagle River and I found a little island. I'll show you guys on Google Earth. There's a little island that was flooded up. Let me transition this over here. Give me a second. And it was flooded up, and there was a bunch of this is the island. You can see what it looks like when it's down. There's a little ditch that runs in here, and then that thunder's bad. Good thing I'm not in the lake live streaming on the water. That would have been rough. But anyway, so this little island was flooded up. I'll try to find an image where the lake is a little bit higher up, and there we go. And so all this stuff was covered in water, and these fish were pushed back up in here. And I was thinking, man, I'm going to just hammer them in this area. And all I was catching was 12 inches, 14 inches, 15 inches. And I caught I had 1 2.5 pounder that jumped me off, but that's about it. And as I was going through all this, I'm like, why am I only catching 2-pound bass? And what I realized as I was going through this, and this is all hindsight, but what I realized is that the people or the areas I was fishing had a lot of fish, but I wasn't really concerning myself about the size of the forage in the area. And that's kind of another, I guess, quote unquote misconception about offshore fishing, is that the second misconception is that these fish are going to group up by size, and it's just random where they group up. So like this point over here, all these fish are grouped up were like 2-pounders. And so the idea is that if the fish are grouping up by size, all the fish that are 2-pounders are going to be on this spot. But there's not really like a rhyme or reason to it. You just kind of pull up there and it happens to have 2-pounders or it happens to have 5-pounders. But I think the reason that this happens, and I'm not 100% sure on this either. Again, this is kind of something that I thinking through. But over the years, I've always found when I pull up on a ledge like this, if I find really big gizzard shad or really big bait fish, and there's gizzard shad on Beaver and there's gizzard shad on Grand Lake where I fish a lot, these big 8 and 10 inch gizzard shad, if they get into an area and they're loaded in a spot, better quality bass are going to be there because they can feed on those bigger forage. Where a lot of the bait fish I was seeing in this area, in the other area, were small bluegill, small bait fish, threadfin shad that were 3-4 inches long. And as I was going around fishing, I basically was finding these ledges, finding these areas, and I would stop on them every time I saw fish. And I was catching fish, and I was catching fish, and I was catching fish. And I was like, man, this is great. But I had 10 pounds by the end of the day. That's not going to get it done in a tournament, or if I was fishing, on a Saturday or whatever, my 10 pounds would have, I probably would have had like a top 15 finish out of like 75 boats. So it's not like I would have done terrible with 10 pounds on Beaver, but I'm not winning a tournament. Well, how could I have won a tournament? Well, in my head, the way I should have been thinking about it, at least, is I need to maybe pull up and use this school of fish to catch a few fish here and there, but more than anything, I need to ignore areas that don't have large forage in them. And this is kind of what I have always talked about, is finding the forage, but I think that finding the forage is too broad of a concept. So like in the springtime, guys are catching fish in drains and stuff like that. So you go and you run into a creek and you find a drain or a creek, and it might be loaded with little threadfin shad, and you can catch a bunch of 2.25 pound bass on these shad. But if you can find a creek or a drain that has gizzard shad in it, then you're catching 3 and 4 and 5 pound largemouth. Now on Beaver, it's actually harder for me to find the gizzard shad at times than it is on the lakes like Grand, because there's a bunch of striper in Beaver. There's striper all over the place. And so whenever you get striper, it adds complexity to the whole scenario, because a lot of the big largemouth will run with the striper. They're going to be chasing those gizzard shad around. But if you get around the striper, it's sometimes really hard to catch the largemouth because the striper is so big, and like alpha predators, they'll just eat your bait no matter what. So I try to figure out, okay, where can I find big forage? And the goal would be obviously to find gizzard shad on an area around like this. But the other option is to find big bluegill, because a 2-pound bass, well, it probably could eat a smaller bluegill. If you get a brim or a bluegill that's like, a pound, like a really big brim or a big bluegill, now you're cooking. You're going to find a better quality bass, because they have to be better quality to actually eat. So when I'm going around graphing and stuff like that, I really honestly feel like I need to start changing my mentality a little bit. And instead of thinking about finding groups of bass or finding this holy grail where I'm going to pull up and I'm going to find a magic school of 5-pounders, I need to find the areas that have the better quality bait fish. And this kind of ties in with misconception 1 and misconception 2. When I was over here in this other area on Beaver, I found that there were better quality bass hanging around this area. Why were there better quality bass here? Well, in my head, the way I'm thinking about it is that I was seeing brim beds and bluegill around here, and I have a feeling those bluegill were bigger, better quality bluegill. That's why the better quality bass were here. If I can find, I know for a fact on Beaver, like I found a ledge one time that had big 7, 8, 9 inch gizzards on it, and I caught like a 5 and a 4 pounder on that ledge on Beaver. And so that's kind of a really interesting concept. So that's not to say that you shouldn't be graphing for schools of fish or you shouldn't be graphing for brush or anything like that. But I do feel like when I'm going out to the lake, I need to be really hyper focused on finding those better than average bait fish and not worry so much about the structure or the cover I'm fishing or anything like that. I almost need to just find like a zone. If we kind of pull it up on like Google Earth, for example, maybe I can get into an area where I'm like, okay, I'm now in this area, and for whatever reason, like this zone right here, like this zone has a bunch of big bluegill or a bunch of big gizzard shad in it. If the bigger bait fish or forage are there, there's a really high likelihood there's going to be a group of better quality bass somewhere in this area. Then I need to say, okay, this is my zone. Well, where could those fish be setting up? And if we pull over like Google Earth or Navionics, then it's like, okay, now let's look at the potential places where these fish could be setting up. We know that the shad are in this general zone. Well, maybe they're on this point over here. Maybe they're on this little high spot here. Maybe they're on this hump out here. There's all kinds of areas they could be. Or maybe there's just a bunch of random stumps and little laydowns and all kinds of stuff that could be out here that are holding better quality, fish that are just kind of hanging out. And one thing I will say is that usually when you're on a lake like this and there's shad and things like that, the bass are not just going to roam randomly most of the time. There are times when the bass will just kind of randomly roam on the shad, but a lot of times they like to set up on some type of hard cover or hard structure. So if we kind of go to like a Google Earth image again, and we go to like this big flat, if we take the lake down, we can probably find an image where the lake's pretty low. We can kind of, there we go. So here's like a really low image. So these bass are more likely to set up on like a little rocky spot there, or around a little laydown, or a little stick up, or a little piece of cover, and they're going to set up around these things to ambush those bait fish. They need someplace to hide around. But you don't necessarily need this massive brush pile, this massive like rock pile. As long as there's just something around for them to hang out in, and there are bigger bait fish in the area, at least my theory is that that's going to produce better quality fish. So that's what I'm toying with. That's the idea I'm toying with right now. And the reason I'm even evaluating the strategy, you may be like, what are you talking about? Well, this is obvious, or this is, we've done this for years. Well, the difference is that when I would pull up on an area in the past, I didn't have forward-facing sonar. So I needed to be throwing at some type of object, a rock, a brush pile, a ledge, something. But now, with forward-facing sonar, I can go through this whole area here, and I can say, okay, I know that the bait fish are in this area. I know that there's 8-inch gizzard shad here. I'm now going to go around with my forward-facing sonar, find those bigger gizzard shad, and then find objects around those gizzard shad, like a little tiny stick up, a little stump, a little vein of rock, and I'm going to fire at those objects that have the gizzard shad around them, or have a brim bed around them, or whatever, and those are the objects I'm going to target, because that's where the bass have a potential to be. You may also see some bass around or some fish around. You can also fire at those. And you now can basically, instead of worrying about fishing a spot, when I was growing up, my whole concept of offshore fishing was, I need to find the spot. I need to find the ledge, the point, the ditch, whatever it is. But that's not really what we need to do nowadays, forward facing. And the old strategies work. I'm not going to say that they don't work. And one thing I will say about that is, like, I went out to Grand Lake just the other day, just on Thursday. And I'm like, man, I'm going to go out to Grand Lake. I'm going to graph around a little bit. And my old strategies 100% worked. So I launched here. I went around the corner. I graphed around for a bit. I found a little point that stuck out here. So right here, this little point, loaded with fish all over the place. Found them with side imaging, caught 17 pounds on the spot. Found them with side imaging, didn't use forward-facing sonar at all. There were some gizzards around. It was a really good day. I caught fish. The problem is that I had 17 pounds, but there was a big bass tournament over the weekend with like 1,500 boats in it, and I heard that there were like over like 5-10 guys I talked to or heard from that had like 22 to 23 pound bags of fish. Why are they catching so many bigger fish? Well, one, I mean, I only fished out here for like 4 hours, so it wasn't like I was like grinding, but I also feel like I wasn't maximizing this area with my forward-facing sonar. I didn't really go and like expand around the area or like really try to dial in everything I possibly could. I was just pulling up. I could throw a worm, I could throw a crankbait, I threw a tush with a Sakamata shad on it, worked that, the cortical tush, caught some really nice fish, and I'm like, okay, cool, got a video, going home. And then to find out, guys are catching, my biggest fish was like a 4 3/4. There's guys catching 5 4 3/4 pounders in one trip. And that's the challenge now that I'm running into. The weights on all these lakes have inflated dramatically because of forward-facing sonar. Let's say I was fishing a tournament 5 years ago, pre-forward-facing sonar, and pre-information about electronics and the offshore stuff and everything I've been sharing on this channel for the past 5 years, or 7 years. This spot right here probably I would have had this relatively to myself. Maybe a few other guys would have figured it out, but it would have been like the top guys. And I catch 17 pounds here. Maybe I fish it harder. I catch 18, 19 pounds. I'm in the top 10 in the tournament on Grand out of 100 boats. I'm doing great. Now, if I do that today, I'm probably finishing 30th, 35th. And that's because guys can just roll around and they know where maybe all the brush piles are. They have a bunch of different areas. They can kind of just get in these zones, live scope around, and just throw at stuff and catch fish. And it's not really necessarily like my favorite because it's annoying that like the skill and what I've developed over the years is kind of being, I guess, eliminated, or not eliminated, but like it's not as effective as it used to be. But also there's just more information out there, so it's not like, that's just part of the evolution of the game. But one thing I will say is that it's a lot harder now to just roll into an area like this, go to the juiciest looking drops and points and things like that, just fish and go catch them. A lot of times what I'm finding, my best days at least, is I'm finding stuff like randomly on these like random flats or like random areas like this, and there's just like a few places here, there, and I'm just kind of rolling through these areas, picking off a random 4-pounder out of a brush pile, and then a random 3-pounder off a rocky spot. And if you watch a lot of the top pros that are fishing, like a Tyler Williams, while they're not randomly fishing by any means, they're finding these little zones with better quality fish using kind of what I talked about at the beginning. But they're not going and just saying, I'm going to go fish this one drop-off or this one ledge. They're finding an area, a zone. And that's kind of what happened with the Bassmaster Classic. This Ray Hanselman, I believe that's his name, finished second. And then, Justin Hamner was fishing in this area too. A lot of guys were fishing in this area, mouth of Horse Creek on Grand. He was just rolling through like this area in through here and like all this stuff out here. And he was just he found out that there were better quality fish in this general zone. And there's just random little like points of rock or like a random stick up just out here. And he's like, okay, this whole area has quite a few quality fish around it. And maybe each spot has like 2 fish, 3 fish on it. It's not like there's like 30 fish on each spot. But there's good bait fish in this area. Maybe there's some good crawfish, some rock, a little like isolated small tiny brush piles, and he basically just worked this general zone, picking off one fish here, one fish there. It's not like he pulled up on a hump or whatever and caught a mega school of fish like we kind of think about old school offshore fishing. That's kind of not as effective just because all these areas get hammered by guys who know how to study a map and know how to use now forward facing. They can just see this hump, pull up, drop their scope, and fish around. So it's interesting, we're almost going from an era where we would try to fish a small little like isolated piece of structure, narrow it down to like a little hump or something, and we're almost taking it back to say, let's find the football field that has the better quality fish and the better quality bait, and then pick off all of the fish we can out of that football size field area. I not like 1,000% on this theory or this concept, but I feel pretty good about it, at least in my head at the moment, from all the research I've been doing, watching all the tournaments, everything like that. It feels like that's kind of what's happening. So I need to do a lot more experimentation, a lot more fishing. I've not been fishing all that much, again, until lately, but I've been out enough. And one thing I got to kind of get okay with is I'm going to have to start having some bad days. Well, that's one thing that's a little bit tricky. I've been out here fishing, obviously, and I want to go catch fish. So I'm going and doing some of my old school tactics, my normal stuff, fishing areas that I think are going to have fish, seeing them on my graph. But when you're learning and when you're figuring stuff out, you have to be okay not catching anything and zeroing and not having any fish get in the boat. And it's a little bit scary from my perspective, from a content standpoint. So what I'm hoping, and you guys can let me know in the comments if you want this, but I want to be almost making videos where maybe I'm not even catching that many fish, but like I'm showing you what I'm learning, what I'm finding, all those things, because having that freedom to fail and to not go catch fish and to like maybe just get out in like a big general area like this and just try to graph for gizzard shad for like 6 hours. And I finally find an area, then I have to spend another day trying to break down that area. That might take me 2 full days to figure all that out, and I might end up catching 2 fish the entire time. But if I could figure that out, I think it could be very interesting learnings for you guys. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. I need to be a little bit okay with the failure, because right now I'm catching fish. I'm doing well relative to how it used to be in the past, but because weights are so much higher and guys are getting so much better, catching what I used to catch 5 years ago is not going to get it done now, because just the quality of fishermen, the ability, the weights, everything is so much higher. And that's why I want to get back into fishing more, is really just start understanding and unlocking all this stuff and obviously sharing it with you guys. So let me get to some questions we got over here in the comments. Let's see here. Insanity RTV says, are you checking any personal lakes out? We have different lakes in Indiana. I fish a lot and would love to hear your take on 2 lakes in particular. Yeah, I mean, send that over. I'm actually thinking about doing lake breakdowns in the second half of these streams for you guys, just picking like a lake or 2 every week based on what I've been seeing. I think that'd be great. I'm going to do that probably over on my Patreon page, but I'm going to set that up, so don't worry about that right this second. But as I'm getting back into doing the streams and all that stuff, I'm trying to figure out exactly how to handle that, but I'm thinking about doing a lake breakdown every week, maybe 1 to 2, like in the second half of the stream. So yeah, if Insanity, if you are still in the stream, you can drop a lake name and I can try to go find it. But then after that, I'll probably post something on my Patreon page, and then you guys can request your lake. I'll put information here on the stream too. Let's see what else we got here. Fish the Bash Sunday was taking 4.5 pounders just to get last place for 20th in the bi-hourly. Yeah, that's the thing. It's crazy. Like on the day I was out there, T-Dill, I mean, I caught a 3 3/4 and like a 490 something. And I hadn't been to Grand Lake in 6 months, 8, or maybe even more than that, like 8 months I hadn't been to Grand. So I just pulled up just completely blind, 4 hours. I caught a really good one, but that wouldn't have done anything. I know the guys were catching 5 and 6 pounders left and right, pulling them out like crazy. So it's like, if there was a tournament this past weekend, it literally would have taken 23 pounds. So my 17 pounds, people would be laughing at it almost. It's crazy. Thanks, Insanity. I see that in there. I'll check that out. Once I get through these questions, I'll check that out. Edward, can you talk about how you work the Sakamata, like a fluke with jerk, pull, winding? Yeah, so basically with the Sakamata, what I'm doing, I'll show you that's not how you spell that. Sakamata. So this is I use both of these, the regular and the heavyweight. I kind of like the heavyweight one for fishing a slightly deeper. And let me actually duplicate this real quick. And then I'm throwing it with a core tackle 7/0 1/4 ounce tush. So core tackle 7/0 1/4 ounce tush. All these reviews, by the way, they annoy me because they're all like, you need a lighter hook version. If you guys do like the tush hook, which is you can insert all the weight inside your swim bait, you can actually go to Tackle Warehouse, and we now have a finesse tush. And so if you left a bad review on Core Tackle, go change it, because we made a finesse version by popular demand. It's a 2/0 finesse hook. It's the same hook that's in a lot of the popular other finesse swim baits. It comes in a 2/0 eighth, 3/16 and quarter ounce. It's a little finesse size. Fits perfect like a 2.2, 3.3 Kitech. Anyways, but I like throwing the 7/0 quarter ounce. The 7/0's a big hook, quarter ounce size, and I'm just inserting it into the Sakamata. And I'm using the 8-inch Sakamata. The 8-inch is my favorite. I love it because it just gets a lot of good bites. And this is the color I like, the Reservoir Shad. Really, really good bait. And this is kind of what I caught that 4 3/4 on Grand on Thursday. I have a video coming out with it, with the fish catches. But anyways, so I'm basically rigged that thing up. I fire it out, and then I let it sink for 2-3 seconds. And then what I do is I just hop my rod 2-3 times, reel up the slack, and let it sink for like 2-3 seconds. Pop the rod 2-3 times. And I don't really like watching this bait on live scope all that much. If I'm going to try to do live scope, like have fish follow the bait, I actually go to a glide bait, because the glide bait, you can work and get it in front of them and react more. I'm not very good with the glide bait yet, so I'm working on that. But I do like throwing the glide a little bit more for that. But with this bait, I think it's the speed where you can basically like pop really fast, and then it just dies and like kind of glides because it has those wings on the top. It has these wings, and on that 7/0 quarter ounce tush, it just glides perfect. And pop, let the thing glide, and oh man, it's so good. It looks amazing in the water, and it gets big bites. The one thing about this 8-inch size, 2-pounders won't eat it very easily. Like, you're not going to catch a lot of 2 to 2.5 pounders on this thing. If you want to catch 2 to 2.5 pounders, go to a crankbait, go to something smaller. I'll throw a 7/0, or I'll throw the 4/0 3/8 ounce tush. So the 4/0 3/8 is actually the one that's on the screen here, with a 5.5 inch spunk shad. So I'll go here. The Hog Farmer spunk shad. So this is a really good bait, 5.5 inch with the 4/0 3/8 ounce tush. If you want to do that same technique, but your fish are a little bit keyed in on smaller bait fish, like 4 and 5 inch shad. But when they're really keyed in on the big gizzards, that I only throw that 7/0 quarter ounce with that 8-inch Sakamata, because you're just gonna get bigger bites. And like, I caught 3 fish on it, and all of them were over 3.5 pounds. So really quality fish on it. Not many guys are throwing this. So this is like my little deal right now that I kind of feel like I have to myself, because guys just aren't throwing the 7/0 quarter ounce tush. They're not getting in there. The hover rig also, we have a new hover rig I'm experimenting with that is also freaking amazing. We don't have it out yet. The reason I was trying it, so we have the hover rig, we have this new HD hover rig, and we have this 6/0 quarter ounce, and it's a heavy duty hook, like super heavy. And I was putting this with it's the fish roller, and I need to get more of these. It's this right here, the fish roller, and everyone throws the 5-inch. I'm throwing the 6-inch size, 6.5 inch size. And I started by putting the 6/0 quarter ounce heavy duty, but the way you can get the action out of this bait, you need to throw in the spinning rod, at least in my experience. And this hook is a little bit heavy for a spinning rod, so we're coming out with a 5/0. It's the biggest light wire hook we could find, so we're coming out with a 5/0 size in the hover rig pretty soon, and it fits with this fish roller. And man, that's a freaking juice bait too. And I caught a bunch of fish on Grand Thursday also that were like just kind of chilling around, and you can work that bait like the guys are working the Demiki rig, where you can shake your rod and just reel it, and it just wobbles that thing back and forth, and it rocks it. And with that 5/0 hover rig we have coming out, this bait, it's also money. So like, my 2 baits right now I'm throwing a lot are the Sakamata, 8-inch Sakamata with the 7/0 quarter ounce tush, and then also the fish roller with that prototype 5/0 hover rig, which we have in production. So we're getting it out. We just have to get the final versions in, and then put them up on the website. Anyways, Cool. So let's Edward, before we get into insanity. Edward says, seeing the process is more important to me as a learner than seeing you catch bass. I know you can catch them. I want to see how to figure these approaches out, because that's what I'm working on too. Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of what I try to show guys, because like at this point I'm so far removed from my like tournament days that I feel like I'm losing a little bit of my juice, like to an extent, not like fully. Like I still could go catch them really well, but like I feel like there's guys now who are really, really, really good, and I feel like I just don't have like experience with the glides and with these other new techniques, that because I just haven't been fishing as much, and I want to learn all of them and develop it all. And I feel like if I can just put like 2 to 3 days in the water like I'm doing now, I'm going to get back up to speed super, super fast. And it's just taking what we've already learned and expanding it and learning and doing new stuff. So before we get into the lake breakdown for Insanity, real quick, just want to give a huge shout out again to Bridgeford Foods, the sponsor of the Fish the Moment live stream. Bridgeford's been a long-time sponsor of the Fish the Moment long-form content. Huge shout out to Bridgeford. If you guys do want to get a great snack for the lake, pick up some Bridgeford beef jerky. It's really soft and tender, really, really tasty, and you can find it over at dollar stores, gas stations, and at Walmart checkout lines. So definitely check that out. Okay, let's get to your lake Insanity. So we got Lake Monroe. It has flood control lake, big lake for Indiana. Let's see here, a lot smaller this time of year, and I've started learning offshore the last couple of weeks. I've done good, but I can't tell why I do good in certain spots to be able to repeat. Okay, so let's go to Lake Monroe. Let's try to find that. Monroe, Indiana. Okay, here we go. So let me know, Insanity, if this is the lake. I hope this is the lake. While you confirm in the comments, I'll check another comment real quick. Fish is also on Saturday and only caught small fish here in Georgia. Saw no bait fish. Maybe should have went deep. Your thoughts? Yeah, if you're not seeing bait fish around up shallow like brim, or seeing actual bait like on your graph, 100% you want to relocate. Try to find areas with the bait fish in it, whether it's deep or shallow. Certain times of the year, shallow is good. Certain times of the year, offshore is better. But you need to find the better quality bait, whether they're shallow or deep, for sure. Cool. Insanity says this is the lake. So if I'm checking out this lake, Lake Monroe, let me actually pull up Google Earth too, just so I can look at it real quick. Any lake, basically, guys, can follow the same process I'm talking about here. So it's not necessary always to say like, okay, what Johnny's talking about is only relevant to Beaver Lake in Arkansas or Grand Lake in Oklahoma. The concepts all apply everywhere. It's just a matter of how you apply them. So if we take a look at this lake, looks like we got some clear water down by the dam, dirtier water up in the creeks. It gets real muddy up in the creeks up here. Shallow, kind of muddy, silty stuff here. So it looks like a typical kind of, it probably sets up kind of like a lowland reservoir-ish type impoundment. So if I was going to check out this lake, honestly, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the biggest flats on the lake. That's always where I start on a lake, no matter what. And I'm going to scroll in here and basically try to find the biggest flat areas. So in my just quick look here, this is a big flat area where you have big flat and it drops off. Another big flat area right here. And another big flat area, maybe up here. I don't know, actually. I thought I saw something. Oh, yeah, up here. There's also some really nice ledges right here. Ooh, that looks really freaking good. Anyways, this looks like a cool lake. I would like to fish here. So, first things first, I would come over here when this a little bit cleaner water, and I'd look at these flats. And in the past, old Johnny, if you watch my live streams like 5 years ago, I'd be like, okay, let's find the place where your creek channels, here's your nice creek channel, runs up against a flat area. So like this point, probably pretty money. This point right here, also probably pretty money. Creek channel, point, connect, drop off into the channel. The reason these spots are good is just because the creek channels where the bait's going to set up and migrate through, and then they'll move into the creek and then back out. So like this area is probably going to have a lot of fish around it. But that was old Johnny. New Johnny is going to be like, okay, everybody and their brother is going to be fishing this point and this point. This is a big community hole. So where can I look that's not here or here? So what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to start graphing like here, and I'm going to graph all of this stuff all through here randomly, like out, just basically like surveying this whole area through here. And what I'm looking for, not necessarily like if I see a brush pile, I'm not going to stop and fish it. If I see a rock pile, I'm not going to stop and fish it. I want to find the bait fish. So if there are a lot of bait fish, for example, setting up around this area, then I'm probably going to pull up and start trying to find every little rock, stump, stick up, even if it's like the size of like a 12-gallon bucket. Like, you don't need to find giant pieces of cover, a little rock or whatever. And if there's a bunch of bait in the area, I'm going to start targeting those individual small pieces of cover, pitching at them, throwing a jig at them. If you don't have forward-facing sonar, then I probably would look for slightly bigger pieces of cover just so you can actually hit them. Maybe something the size of the front deck of your boat. Mark them with a waypoint, then fire a jig or a crankbait over at them. Really easy stuff. Now, I would do this, and I probably am going to check multiple areas because it's highly unlikely that you're going to pull up into this first zone here and just start loading the boat. Most of the time when I get to the lake, like I'll graph through an area like this, then I'll graph through an area like this, another flatter area, graph through an area like this, same thing, just like kind of get in like a random depth zone, like 5 foot, and graph out to 15, graph all the way around until you start seeing the bait. And once you start seeing the bait, let's say in 9 foot of water or 12 foot of water, now I'm going to focus and graph like 9 to 12 foot all around because that's where the bait fish are. If the bait fish are in 15 feet of water, I'll graph in 15 feet. And obviously, like places where the channel runs up against a flat here, this is going to be a really good area to catch fish, but it's also going to be super obvious. So not always just going to pull up. Sometimes you can pull up the most obvious stuff, like when I fish on a Thursday, I can do that, but that's not really realistic for a Saturday in a tournament if there's other guys out here. So gonna check all this stuff out. I mean, here's another like really obvious ledge where the lake swings in, but maybe instead of just trying to check just that little drop off there, maybe up on this flat up here, or maybe in this general zone through here, maybe even like this little few points that kind of stick out right in through here. And if you find the bait, especially if you can find, like, if it's perch, maybe brim, maybe it's some, golden shiner, maybe it's big alewife, if you're on a big northern lake, gizzard shad, threadfin shad, whatever it is, find your bait and then really focus on that. Obviously, roadbed or something like this looks kind of interesting too, just because, like, roadbeds are always potentially, if this is actually real, it may not be real, but if there's a roadbed here, that's kind of interesting too. And then obviously, like, the last piece that I would say is on, like, up in this area, depending on the water visibility, like if it's super, super muddy, like up here, probably not the best. But if this clarity looks like you have maybe 1.5 foot, 2 foot of visibility, maybe even like 1.5 foot, 2 foot, this little ledge, like these ledges through here, if you graph down these ledges and you can find a group of fish on your side imaging, you could absolutely load the boat. Just going down these ledges, finding where these things intersect, right in here, right there, or just graph the entire ledge down. This is these giant expanses of ledge. This is like a Tennessee River ledge situation. There's going to be a sweet spot, most likely a little shell bed or a little rocky spot you'll find. If you can find any sort of hard bottom on the edge of this ledge and there's bait around it, you're going to freaking load the boat. You just need to have bait and hard bottom. So that would be how I break down this lake. Hopefully that was kind of helpful. I'm going to do this again for guys, again, Patreon. I'll probably break down a couple different lakes per stream going forward. I don't have that set up today, but I'll make a post over on my Patreon page. You can find it in the description of the video or just on my main YouTube page. You can join my Patreon page. I'm going to change up the tiers and everything. I have to still do that on the Patreon side, so I'll get that done this week, and then I'll make a post and we'll let you guys know basically what to do. You can send me a message or whatever it is. I'll figure something out. It'll be in the Patreon page. So, good deal. So let's keep rolling then. Insane says, most of those ledges seem like most of the time are absolutely swarmed with crappie. Thanks for the breakdown. Very helpful. Yeah, if they're swarmed with crappie, actually a lot of those big bass will eat the crappie too. So if they're swarmed with crappie and they're full of like brush piles and stuff like that, find the harder bottom areas in that deal and throw like a crappie colored crankbait or a crappie colored like I don't know if you got like a 8.0 square bill. I don't know what the depth is on that always, but like if you throw like an 8.0 square bill, I think is there a crappie color? There's not a crappie color. Maybe just throw something like this, like a white color, and then if not, you could throw a Strike King 6XD, put it on a little bit heavier line. And I think they have a crappie color 6XD. If they don't, then just throw again something that's really white. Splatterback. Here we go. Pearl Splatterback. This one. This is a good crappie color crankbait. Throw that, because a lot of times those better bass will feed on those crappie as well. And you can catch them. It's just you're not going to get a ton of bites. Like that sort of deal when they're feeding on crappie, you're going to be dealing with like maybe getting 5, 6, 7 bites a day. Like it's going to be a grind to find them and figure it out. But if you can figure it out, you're going to freaking catch a bag doing it. Let's see here. Do you have a breakdown of Clear Lake in California? I do not, at least recently. I maybe did like years and years and years ago, but I don't have any I could pull off the top of my head. So yeah, that's the one thing too, guys. Like we don't have the lake breakdowns over on fishingmoment.com anymore because I just don't feel comfortable with like the new way that fishing is going with the breakdowns. I don't know. What's your opinion on that in the comments? Because like I was thinking about making more, but like the thing is now their fish are in such weird situations. I almost want to like redo how I do breakdowns, where it's like I almost want to make just another offshore fishing playbook, or maybe I can figure out a way to break it down. But like the way it's setting up is it's less about, like I talked about, it's less about the specific spot anymore because people are always finding all these specific spots. It's more about the general zones. And I don't know if it would be better just to like, the breakdown seems silly to be like, here is this zone and here is this zone, because it's just a big zone. But like obviously there are specific zones of the lake that set up better shallow and offshore. But that's kind of the tricky part is like, these are the obvious spots. I almost need to be like obvious stuff, less obvious stuff. Maybe that's a good way to do the breakdown or something like that. I don't really know. For you guys, like I could say like, these are the community holes. These are like the less fished. This is like the needle in a haystack. And like these are but here are the top 5 offshore zones of the lake. And I kind of give a breakdown of the little intricacies within it that I'm seeing. Maybe that's a good way to do it. Cause I know you guys really appreciate that stuff, and I do know how helpful that is, because it even just get a different perspective on a lake. Like I like getting breakdowns. You know, if I was going to a new lake I hadn't been to, or just to get a different perspective or a look, because I look at lakes one way, and then it's funny to see you point out the exact community holes. Have never seen the lake. Having never seen the lake. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is like the community holes to me are like they jump out like a freaking sore thumb now. And so in my mind, like 10 years ago, I would just roll up to these spots and like 15 years ago when I started doing this, nobody was on these things. I was like, I had this like completely to myself. Some of these lakes I was using paper maps to find this stuff. And I just pull up and just absolutely just load the boat, 50 fish days like crazy. And now it's like you can do it on like a Tuesday if everything sets up perfect and there's nobody on the lake. But like, you know, it's just that's not what I'm really looking for. And I try not to go fish that stuff too much when I'm in my videos either, because it's really not helpful to just like say, look, I caught fish on a community hole. That doesn't help anybody, because everyone knows these spots if you're fishing a tournament. So I really do try to avoid them, just so you guys know. Like when I'm out there fishing, I probably could catch more fish and make it easier, but again, that's not how I operate. I don't really just want to go out and be like, look, I went on a Tuesday and caught 15 pounds off community hole. That's, to me, that's kind of, I don't know, kind of rough. I don't want to do that. So anyways, let's see here. Lake Monticello at Pine Bluff. Is that lake still like, I thought they drained that lake in Pine Bluff. I fished that when lake was like I think they drained it or something. That lake is like, we used to be money, and then they like destroyed it. I think that's what I remember. Do do you ever do breakdowns of natural lakes? We have a lot of them in northern Indiana. They get a lot of pressure. Matt Steffen has done some breakdowns in the past on them. Maybe we can kind of resurrect those. But I don't know specifically for Indiana, but we can check on that. Do you ever, or let's see, I go back and watch your breakdowns all the time. My forward-facing sonar has only worked with the pelagic fish during the winter. Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting. That's what I'm really struggling with, guys, like with the forward-facing sonar stuff. I've in the exact same boat where like I've caught the fish, the pelagic fish. Pelagic is basically the fish that just kind of swim around randomly, and I've done that with the Demiki rig and stuff like that. But I haven't really dialed it in for the other times of the year, but I know that guys are doing it. I know how effective it is, and I really do think that the juice with it, in my opinion, is that you can target those small wolf packs. Because if you think about the winter, when you get those pelagic fish, like I found some groups and stuff in like back here a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago. I was on the Demiki rig deal like a year and a half before it became mainstream in pro fishing. You can watch my videos. I was like cracking them back on Beaver. No one else was freaking doing it. I had it all to myself. And they were just like roaming in through here, chasing bait, and I was following them, and it was great and fine and dandy. The thing is that the fish I was catching were always like small, like groups of 2-3 bass, maybe 1 or 2 bass here and there. And they roam and they chase bait. Well, if they do that in the winter, why don't they do it in the summer? And my conclusion is they do that in the summer, and they do that different times of the year. And that's what I'm trying to learn right now, is basically, I know in the winter what I try to do, my trick in the winter is find the 200-400 yard zone or 50-yard zone that has a ton of quality fish around, and I just kind of roll around the circle and just fire and fire and fire and catch. But those fish don't always set up like that year round. But if you can find a flat or a little area or something like this, I don't know, I'm just picking random spots, doesn't really matter. But like something in here, and there's a 50-100 yard zone where every stump, there's a 3-pounder sitting on it, and they're just chasing brim or gizzards or whatever. Now you're doing the same thing you're doing in the winter with those pelagic fish, and they're not necessarily, maybe those fish are like in those wolf packs like we talk about up shallow, 3-4 fish, and they're just cruising around these areas, and you just kind of happen to see one by a stump, you pitch by it, and you get him to bite. But either way, I'm trying to figure that part out, because I don't want to go and just fish the community holes, because I've done that. That's been there, done that. A lot of guys can do that, and that's why the weights are so high in a lot of these tournaments now, is because guys know where the community holes are way more than they did before. But not only do they know the community holes, they know the sweet spots on the community holes because of the forward-facing sonar. When I was fishing these community holes in the past, I would graph them with side imaging, down imaging, 2D sonar, and I could mark the exact little tiny spot that's the size of the front deck of my boat where the quality fish were. Most guys on the lake could not do that. Nowadays, though, you can just drop the scope around on this community hole, even if, guys don't know exactly what's down there, they just see someone fishing it, they can pull up. With the scope, they beam over there, they can see where the dots are, they fire, and they catch them. And that's why I think these weights are just skyrocketing. So it's now an idea of how do you combat this, or how do you maybe augment where I can get on one community hole per day, and then I augment it with 2 or 3 really big fish in an area. And maybe you're only getting 2-3 bites a day doing something, and then you fill in with a community hole spot or whatever. But that's, I think, how you need to do it to do well in tournaments. And I know that's how a lot of the guys are doing it right now. I'm just behind the 8 ball on it. Let's see here. Anything else we got? How do you break down a lake that doesn't have full depth chart before you go? That's a really tough one. Honestly, what I will do if there's not like a full depth chart is I just pick a zone of the lake. So like one lake that, try to think some lakes around here. Like, there's a lake, where is it? This one. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to find That's not the lake I was thinking. Here we go. This is a little lake. There's a bunch of little lakes around here. It doesn't really matter. If there's a ton of lakes that don't have any mapping. So like if you don't have any mapping like on any of these lakes, like this one, what would I do? What I'm probably going to do is I'm probably just going to pick a zone of the lake, and I'm just going to get in here, and I'm just going to grid out, let's say, a 1.5 mile section, and I'm just going to start graphing. And I'm just going to use my side imaging to kind of get a sense for what's going on in the lake. Side image like crazy. And while I'm side imaging, I'm going to look down the shore. I'm going to see what's around on the lake. Do I see birds on the shoreline? Do I see bait fish flickering? I try to get a sense for what's happening while I'm graphing. And if I see some birds on the bank, picking up shad, or I see some shad skipping, I'm going to run over, fish that bank for a minute, throw a buzz bait, throw whatever, and then get back out, keep graphing if I don't get bit. And I'm just going to keep graphing, and I'm not going to worry so much about what's on the map. And a lot of times I do better that way because I'm not worried about the map. I'm not sitting here staring at like, here's this perfect contour or whatever. I just am just graphing, and you find sometimes the coolest stuff that way. So that's kind of what I do. Just you have to spend more time with your side imaging in those situations, but it can really pay off. Do you break down any Kansas lakes? It sounds like you need to be doing breakdowns. Is what it sounds like. Well, what I can do again, I'm gonna be doing the breakdowns every week on the stream. Basically what I want to do, the goal is to split up the stream where it's like first 20-30 minutes is me talking about what I've learned on the lake. So like basically the idea would be I go out fishing for the week, I come back, I share whether I sucked, whether I caught them, whether I learned a new bait or whatever. I'm going to share it all with you guys in the stream. And then I want to spend the second half of the stream, 20, 30, 40 minutes, however long it takes, breaking down 2 to 3 lakes on the stream every week. So I basically go in, break down some lakes, where I would check it out, what I would do. Not anything like crazy. I'm not going to go in like super hyper detail, but just like I did with that lake earlier, that Lake Monroe, just give you guys some high level stuff that I would try, and hopefully that will help out and you guys can get some info there. So again, follow me on my Patreon page if you guys do want to get your lakes submitted. I'll only be able to do like 2 or 3 a week, but from what I've seen in the past, I think I did that like 4 or 5 years ago. We get through everybody eventually, and a lot of times people can get their like multiple lakes looked at by the time it's all said and done. So that should work. And let's see here. Hayden said it's refilled, Lake Monticello refilled. I need to get back down there then. If it's any good, you let me know too if it's any good. Sam says you need a forward-facing playbook, Johnny. It would sell like crazy. That's the plan. I do not feel confident enough to make a playbook on forward-facing sonar yet. Hopefully within the next like maybe 3 months, I'll kind of feel better. I'm not the type of person who just like will make a forward-facing playbook just to do it. Like, I really want to have some pretty solid things in there. So like my offshore fishing playbook I have now definitely is like outdated, but it's very good for everything non-forward facing sonar. If you don't have forward facing sonar, that playbook is still juice. It still works fantastic. It's just I need to augment it. And I actually have one in the works. I talked about it on Bass Talk Live like a year ago. It's kind of in the works, but I haven't really dialed in everything the way I want it. So I'm very particular. As you probably can tell, I'm very like perfectionist. So I don't feel confident selling anything that I don't feel really, really good about. Whether it's like a breakdown or whether it's a sonar guide or whatever, I go above and beyond. So if you do see something that I'm marketing, guys, like I want you to know, like I really do work hard to make sure it's high quality, and like we get a lot of repeat customers on Fish the Moment, which makes me super happy because it lets me know that people actually like what we do. So anyways, that's it for today, guys. I'm going to kind of cut it short here. I really enjoyed kind of talking with you guys, showing you what's going on. We'll be back next week. I'm going to try to get out to the lake 2 times this week. Start experimenting with some of the stuff we talked about. Learn some new baits maybe. I don't really know. We're going to try a bunch of different stuff. See what happens. And then I'll get that Patreon set up and make a post. We'll be doing the live streams on Mondays. Around this time again, 3 to 5 every single Monday. I don't want to conflict too early with BTL and Matt Pangrak, and then there's other live streams later, so I'm just going to do it this time. Maybe the most people can't get on, but you guys can watch it back after, so that's no problem. And I'll also try to see if I can post this to the Fish the Moment podcast feed on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, because I know a lot of guys like that as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream, and we'll see you guys next Monday, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we may have Matt Steffen join in potentially some days too, so we'll see how that goes. Anyways, thanks again, guys. Hope you enjoyed the stream. See you guys next time.